You ready? Okay, we're done with the science lesson, now the practical stuff. And before I start, I want to give credit to the individual that's most responsible for some of the research that I'm going to be sharing with you today. A guy by the name of Bob Cochran. From 1993 to 1998, I had the good fortune of earning a PhD under that man. He is probably the best guy in the history of the world at what he did. Getting cows to eat and live and thrive on low-quality forages. And old Bob was at K-State from 1996 to 2004, retired in the prime of his career to enter the mission field. He works for Wycliffe Bible Translators in Indonesia right now. You talk about a life change, that was a dramatic one. Now, a good context for what we're going to be talking about is this right here. Okay, I've got a nutrient requirement for cows on the vertical axis here, months of the year down here. The requirement for, in this case, metabolizable energy for a cow, and nutrient supply by our warm season grasses. Okay, the cow in this example weighs 1,200 pounds. She makes 20 pounds of milk at peak lactation. She's going to wean a 500-pound calf. She's dead on average. Now, the period of the year that we are most concerned with feeding beef cows and with managing nutritional deficiencies is this one right here. Okay, between the first day of the calendar year and whenever peak lactation arrives. Now, when a producer sits down with an extension consultant and just thinks about what a supplementation program ought to look like, the things they ought to be thinking about are ranch goals, and usually ranch goals are involved with maximizing nutrient capture from a fixed price budget item. Okay, the land that you run those cows on produces forage. Okay, that forage is part of your fixed cost budget, whether you rent it or whether you own it. Okay, and getting maximum harvestable nutrients off of that fixed cost budget item is a way that we can improve the variable cost side of our ledger. Things that all ranches are concerned about profitability. Some ranches are concerned about labor utilization, particularly when it's not just the family members that are doing all the chores. Some ranches are also concerned about environmental impacts. Okay, what footprint am I going to leave on this land that I'm using? One that we probably need to be thinking a lot about in Kansas, but we don't really give it very much lip service, is grazing distribution. Okay, everybody is driven by the south end of a native grass pasture in this state. How does the appearance of the south end of that pasture differ from the north end of that pasture in the month of October? And when it's hot in Kansas, how do cows naturally cool themselves? They point their noses into the wind and they walk until something stops them. They end up spending a lot of time on south boundary fences. As such, they're going to have more grazing activity on that south end. They're going to degrade those forage resources at a pretty rapid rate. Grazing distribution is a tough nut for us to crack in this state. It's kind of a side issue, but important nonetheless. Okay, the things that you need to talk about with clients. First off, where is the nutrient deficiency and how big is it? Okay, that's definitely a question to ask. Now, fortunately for us, the answer in most cases is very, very simple. And I'm going to show you some research to convince you of that. Next thing we need to think about is what is that supplement supposed to be doing in the diet? Okay, it can do one of two things. It can correct an imbalance directly. Now, when you guys sit down with your diet formulation software, okay, that piece of software is using linear algebra to solve a problem that you present to it. In other words, if you have an energy deficiency and you present that software package with two feeds, say I'm going to feed a 50-50 blend of this stuff, it's going to consider the energy contribution of one feed, the energy contribution of the second, in conjunction with the energy contribution of the forage, and it's going to spit out an answer that's based on linear algebra. But there's another thing that can happen. If we formulate a supplement correctly, okay, the chemistry of that supplement interacts with the chemistry of the forage, and we get something that does not lend itself to prediction with normal linear algebra. That's called an associative effect. In other words, in Kansas, where we usually have an abundance of low-quality warm season forage that has a potentially huge energy supply in it, we can put just a little dab of protein into the diet, ruminally degraded protein, and we can get a huge production response from the animal. Something that we can measure in intake, body condition score change, and digestibility of that overall diet. Okay, it's a small protein addition for a huge return in energy balance on the animal. So, the first limiting nutrient, okay, is the one thing in the diet that's going to limit productivity first. You guys all remember that term from school. The response to a supplementation program is going to be greatest if we address that first limiting nutrient first. That's why when we formulate diets for beef cows, we're first interested in protein and energy, and vitamins and minerals are way down on the priority list. Okay, because those things tend not to be limiting ingredients. But there's a possibility, at least, that it can be protein in nature, energy in nature, or vitamin and mineral in nature. Now, what is it for Kansas? That's the question. This is a lit review that was done by Bob Cochran, had over 100 studies in it, looked at the average change in forage intake in response to supplementation. And he parsed this into forages that were less than 7% protein and greater than 7% protein. So tell me, in terms of intake, where is the greatest response to any kind of supplement? Is it on the good forage or on the bad forage? It's on the bad forage, right? Okay, with any kind of supplement, animals are going to respond more vigorously to those lower quality forage inputs. Now, most ranches have the goal to maximize nutrient harvest from their forage base, right? Okay, if that's my goal, if I want to make as much out of that forage as possible, maximizing intake is usually key to reaching that goal. Okay, but it doesn't tell the whole story. How well is that cow going to handle that forage from a digestive standpoint, and how much energy is she going to be able to extract from it? Again, same database parsed into less than 7% forage protein and greater than 7% forage protein. Where is the response and digestibility here? The good or the bad forage? Okay, it's with the bad stuff, right? So that just drives home the point that the response to supplementation is far more likely to be positive when the forage quality is at its worst. Now, speaking a little bit to the idea, what is the first limiting nutrient here in Kansas? This is another lit review that was done by one of Bob Cochran's PhD students, Jeff Helt, that works for Senex Land O'Lakes up in Nebraska right now. Looking at forage intake on the vertical axis here, and no supplement with less than 15% protein in it, 15 to 20% protein, 20 to 30, or greater than 30. Where is the response and intake most vigorous? Now, when I do this to my students on campus, I make them answer. Those questions are never rhetorical. And if they don't answer, I'll pick somebody and I'll laser them. Where is the response in intake most vigorous? Supplements with greater than 30% protein concentration. Okay, what's the most popular range cube, or what's the protein concentration of the most popular range cube in Kansas? Somewhere between here and here, generally. Now, it doesn't just work for getting the cow to eat more forage. The forage that she does eat, she gets more out of. Here we're looking at digestibility of the diet as a percent of the total. Same classes of crude protein supplements. Where is the maximum response? Above 30% protein concentration. Now, I didn't do this on the first slide, but I want to point out how robust this literature search is. 141 different treatment averages from 31 experiments. This is bankable information. Okay, forage protein or supplement protein concentration for us belongs somewhere north of 30%. Yes, sir.
Basically, what this data says is, you mentioned the most common range is 20%. We're underfeeding protein.
We are, don't look at it like that. We're under supplementing protein. What that protein is doing in the rumen, as you'll see in subsequent slides, is it's kickstarting ruminal energy metabolism. Okay, we're actually supplementing protein, but the response that the animal is showing us is an energy response. It's bizarre. Okay, and it really works. This study, also a Bob Cochran student, Ms. Jane Beatty from up there at Leonardville, Kansas. She looked at the response and body condition score loss in beef cows that were only given access to dormant blue stem range and given supplements containing from 10 to 40% crude protein. Okay, again I ask, where is performance maximum? Less than half a body condition score loss across an entire winter with dormant blue stem only. Cows in this study were fed, across all treatments, were fed an average of, I believe, 3.5 pounds of crude protein per day. 3.5 pounds of supplement per day. Okay, so that brought us to the question. I was around for this one. That brought us to the question, how much protein does it take? How much rumen-degradable protein does it take to maximize the response in cow performance, to maximize intake and to maximize forage digestion? Okay, this is a crazy study. The response criteria here is body condition score change, but we also measured cow body weight change, subsequent production in the next calving cycle. What we did is we fed soybean meal in amounts ranging from 0 to 6 pounds per head per day. No fool in his right mind would ever put 6 pounds of bean meal in front of a cow in a day's time. But what we were looking for in this study is a break point. Where do we hit the point of diminishing returns with supplemental protein supply? The guy that's the first author on this paper you may have heard of. Okay, Clay Mathis now is the director of the King Ranch Management Institute. He got famous based on this study. I'll tell you what. What we figured out is that right at about 3 pounds of supplemental soybean meal per day, we hit the point of diminishing returns. No more ruminal degradable protein supply was necessary. We maximized intake of the forage. We maximized energy harvest of that forage as measured by digestibility. So, how much rumen degradable protein was I delivering with 3 pounds of soybean meal? That's the question. Anybody got an idea? What's the protein concentration of soybean meal? Ballpark. For the stuff that ADM sends over to Europe, 44 is correct. They blend it down with soybean hulls. The stuff that we buy out of the plant is going to be 49.5 on an ASFIC. Okay, so it's a half protein. How much of that protein in soybean meal is ruminally degraded? I mean, it's hard to know, and it'll depend on intake level. But I've seen published values that range from 100% to 70%. Again, depending on intake level. So, I mean, essentially, we're looking at a protein source here that's highly degradable in the rumen. Does that mean I can only use soybean meal to make something like this happen with a beef cow? No. If I know the protein concentration of any protein supplement, the ruminal degradability of any protein supplement, I can make this same thing happen. Now, I've done half a dozen research projects in my career looking at energy supplementation for low-quality forages, mostly because I got sick of answering the same question every December. Casey, I was looking at the cows today, and or I was looking at the cows last month and I noticed they were slipping a little body condition, so I cracked open the bin and I started hauling 5 pounds of corn out to them. But they look worse a month later than they did the day I started feeding the corn. Well, I want to say, didn't we have this conversation a year ago? But I don't. Instead, I point him to this research, or research just like it. This one was actually done at Oklahoma State, but it's a very clean experimental design. Looking at intake of low-quality forage here, the forage represented in the yellow bars, and the supplement represented in the white bars here. The identity of the grain supplement is corn in this case. Okay, as I ratchet the amount of corn up in a beef cow's diet, what happens to intake of low-quality forage? Okay, it goes down pretty sharply. We're at about 20 pounds per day here. We're at about 12 pounds per day here. Big decrease. So what's going on? Why does that extra corn in the diet drive down forage intake? That's exactly right. Okay, I don't want to give you a rumen microbiology lesson. Okay, but for many species of rumen microbes, starch is the preferred energy substrate. When we give them the opportunity to have some of that substrate, okay, they're going to go to town with it. They're going to greatly expand their population. They're going to take space out of that ruminal ecosystem, and they're generally going to do it at the expense of fiber digesters. And so that's why we've got forage intake going south here. Okay, if intake goes down, I don't care. I'm not alarmed as long as the cows are performing. But the fact is they're not. If you look at, remember, we're feeding 1.5, 3, 4.5, or 6 pounds of supplemental corn per day, plus all the forage they'll voluntarily consume. Here we're looking at digestible organic matter intake, which is a gross measurement, very blunt measurement of total energy intake by the animal. What's happening to total energy intake of the animal as I go from 1.5 to 6 pounds of corn? Nothing. I still got to pay for that extra 4.5 pounds of corn here, though, folks. Now, in most cases, when I've got all the low-quality forage I want, this is a pretty critical relationship. Okay, in years like this, for those of you that are south of this point, and you're looking to spare your forage resources, get those cows to consume less forage than is possible, this can actually be a pretty useful relationship. Okay, a high starch, high energy, low protein supplement will spare forage consumption. Now, can I, if I have a fairly starchy supplement, can I overcome that starch by adding rumen degradable protein? That's a question. Okay, this research that we did at K-State in the mid-90s would say no. We, in the white line here, we're supplementing increasing amounts of a rumen degradable protein source with no starch in it. The middle line, same protein levels with just a little bit of added starch. The bottom line, same protein supplements with a little bit more added starch. Each time we added starch to the diet, we decreased the energy yield of that diet. It was weird. How about rumen undegradable protein? Okay, for a lot of the byproducts that we might use as beef cow supplements in the state, they're going to have significant heat exposure during manufacture and processing. That's going to damage some of that protein. It'll probably still be available at the small intestine, but it will not be available to rumen microbes. Okay, this design was, this study was done by Kathy Bandick, who's now with QLF in Wisconsin. But what we did here is we kind of tricked the animal a little bit. We started out with 3 sets of animals that received no supplement, that were to receive a supplement that was delivered right to the abomasum, so we bypassed the rumen, or a supplement that was dumped right into the rumen via fistula. Not doing anything with those 3 treatment groups up till about day 8, and then we start introducing the treatment regime. Okay, right away, as soon as we start introducing a protein source right into the rumen, we see an increase in forage intake. Okay, the animals that got no supplement at all, they just are kind of flatlined here. For animals that got a supplement introduced directly into the abomasum, okay, we're bypassing the rumen microbes altogether. Their intake response was never as vigorous as when the microbes had the first crack at that protein. So here's another call that I get just about every fall. Bought some distiller's grains this summer. Going to use that for my winter cow supplement. I'm feeding those suckers 7 pounds of distiller's grain per day, and they don't look like they're doing anything. They're all ganted up. They're all bawling at me all the time like they're hungry. What am I supposed to do with this? That phenomenon, okay, those bawling, ganted up cows that are getting 7 pounds of DDG a day, this is what they're showing you. Okay, I've got a situation in my life where my rumen is deficient in protein. Now, beyond the scope of this study, okay, beyond 3 weeks, it's my belief that urea recycling will kick into the point where this line will probably eventually get close to this line. Okay, but that protein has got to go through intestinal digestion. It's got to be converted to urea. It's got to be dumped back out into the bloodstream. That process takes about 4 to 6 weeks to get fully geared up. Okay, so here's my quiz. What's our first limiting nutrient in Kansas? It's rumen degradable protein. Okay, if somebody comes into you with just a vexing production problem, those cows just aren't doing what they're supposed to do, 9 times out of 10 you'll be right if you say, how about some rumen degradable protein? Let's fix it with that and see what happens. The things we can expect by meeting that rumen degradable protein need, we're going to get forage intake that in many cases will double or triple over the unsupplemented animal. We'll get forage digestion that goes using dormant Kansas native range as an example. Forage digestion or forage TDN that has an apparent level of 35% unsupplemented and has an apparent level of 62% when supplemented with the right amount of protein. Now, not only do we get the direct benefit of improved protein supply, but because we've got the rumen now fixed up with the right amount of rumen degradable protein, we do a better job digesting the forage and we improve energy status. Now, I want to urge a word of caution here. No diet formulation software on the planet will predict this response. If you ask brands, say, I'm giving my cows all they want of a forage resource that's 35% TDN and 3 pounds of soybean meal per day, what do you think brands are going to tell you about how those cows are going to do? It's going to say good luck and probably blow itself up. But the reality is that what's happening is outside of the realm of linear algebra. Okay, the intake response and the energy yield response from that basal forage is going to give you an actual cow performance that's well above anything that linear algebra will predict. Another for instance, and the food's not here yet, Sandy, so I'm just going to keep talking. Little study I did with one of my grad students at my former employer. Looking at digestible dry matter intake as a percent of an unsupplemented control animal. Again, this figure here, digestible dry matter intake, is a real crude estimate of total energy intake by the animal. Down here I've got supplement dry matter intake and percent of body weight. Now in this study, we started with a low quality forage and we fed increasing amounts of supplements that supplied primarily rumen degradable protein in the red, fiber as an energy source in the yellow, and starch as an energy source in the green. Now, in each case, okay, when I plugged the values for forage intake and supplement intake into, not brands, but another diet formulation software, I got a response that fell on this white line right here, this heavy white line. Okay, that's what the high dollar formulation software is going to tell me. That matched up pretty good with what a supplemental fiber source did. It was soybean hulls in this case, low protein, high energy, but energy in the form of fiber. every time I added rumen-degradable protein, again in the form of soybean meal, I got an energy response. Okay, one that was well above what the formulation software predicted. Every time I added starch to the diet, okay, I got something totally different happening. Somebody interpret this data point right here. Tell me what that means. It certainly takes more. Certainly takes more supplementation, but relative to an animal that got nothing. Okay, what's this animal's total energy intake? It's the same. Okay, I still had to pay for that supplement there, right? But I got no additional response out of the animal. I mean, as I added more and more starch to that diet, eventually I got my line to kind of point north. I got the animal to perform better, but I never did equal in this forage-fed beast what a fiber supplement did or what a rumen-degradable protein supplement did. How we doing on time, Sandy?
What was the starch? Was it corn?
It was corn. It was rolled corn. And the RDP was soybean meal. I kind of gave this up in the previous presentation, but how much rumen-degradable protein is necessary from a quantitative standpoint to max out that intake response, max out that forage digestion response? Bottom line is that if you can figure out what your diet TDN is, or if you have the data, your diet digestible organic matter intake, take that number times 0.13, and that's the amount of supplemental RDP that you need. A little bit on supplement delivery systems. We can change the way we deliver supplements to save on labor, save on cost in some cases. We can either hand feed, which uses labor to manage feed delivery and not technology. The manager is going to be the one that determines allowance and access to the feed on a daily basis, or at least with every supplementation episode. And in that situation, the manager manages social interactions between cattle. And what I mean by that is you control how much physical space you spread that feed out on. You determine whether or not every animal in the group has a chance to eat at one time or not. Ideally, it refers to bunk feeding, but feeding stuff on the ground is pretty common in this part of the world. The other alternative, go ahead.
How did you store and feed that ran and supplementing those cows with?
I'm sorry, could you say?
Supplementing those cows and
How did I store it?
how did you store them?
I dumped it in a big pile with a roof over the top of it, and I went in there with a skid loader, and I put a bunch of big plastic garbage barrels on the ground, and I dumped the sweet bran into the barrels with the skid loader, and then I picked those barrels up and set them on the back of a pickup. We're all about low tech at KSU. All right, self-feeding. Pretty popular because it requires less labor, and I'm using some form of technology to manage feed delivery. The feed allowance on a daily basis is not determined by the manager, but through mechanical, chemical, or physical means. Animal access is 24/7. They can come and get it whenever they want to, but social interaction at whatever feed delivery vessel you're using is not managed. The cows come and go as they please and stay significantly as they please. And usually that means that some kind of physical structure is going to be used to deliver feed. It could be as simple as a plastic barrel, could be as complicated as a $2,500 steel creep feeder. Just a few examples. Okay, sometimes it'll amuse you what producers consider hand feeding and self feeding, but any purchased premix concentrate, any bulk commodity, high quality forages like alfalfa that we're not interested in letting cows lie on and stand on. Self feeding programs include things like creep feeding, medium and low quality forages that we just put out and let them have at. Lick tanks, pretty popular in some parts of the world. Tubs and blocks, boy, every dealer's got one of those, right? and dry feeds that have intake limiting ingredients. In my former career, there were a couple of manufacturers that had products that were billed as limiting themselves. In other words, you could put out a whole pile at once and the cows were only going to eat just the right amount. Okay, things to think about. When you're putting a supplement package together, you're considering hand feeding or self-feeding. What do those things cost per unit of dry matter that you buy, per unit of energy that you buy, and per unit of protein that you buy? Okay, price per ton can be deceiving. Consider what you're buying in the form of a useful nutrient. Protein content is important. There's going to be non-protein nitrogen in most supplements that you would consider. And there's also going to be natural protein. They're not going to be used with the same efficiency. Natural protein is used with greater efficiency than non-protein nitrogen when it comes into the diet. Labor cost and time requirement. Size constraints. How big is your operation? How many times a week can you see your cattle? Most self-fed feeding programs are sold to people, marketed to people, with the idea that, hey, we can self-feed this product and you will get the same performance as what you're with your hand feeding program that you have to go out and do every day. Okay, it's sold based on an average, but it's also important to consider uniformity of performance. Okay, I want to have 95% of my cows bred, not 88%. And I want to have a group of 100 feeder cattle that weigh within 50 pounds of one another, not a group of feeder cattle that weigh within 200 pounds of one another. Yeah, we can wrap it up. Okay, here are some facts. Okay, feed costs, when you express them per unit of nutrient that you buy, can be all over the board. Just make sure you're careful about making the comparisons. The relative mixture of NPN and natural protein is important. In general, if we get the NPN level in a diet, the non-protein nitrogen level in a diet above 25% of the RDP, we'll start getting refusals on those supplements. Cows just don't have much interest in eating them. Labor and time savings that you get when you self-feed have to be critically weighed against increased feed and overhead costs. And average performance needs to be given equal status with uniformity of performance. Don't just base your choice on average performance. When you take supplement out to a group of cows and you put it in a bunk in December, it's a pretty orderly process, right? They all form a single file line and they come up and they're nice and polite and they eat their share and then they move away, right? Okay, it's a melee. If you better be careful that you're at least standing in the feed bunk when you empty the bucket or they're going to knock you on your tail. Undesirable social interactions at a feeder are a reality. And if you're not there as a manager to intervene when problems come up, expect performance issues. Now, one of the things that you get with self-feeding as opposed to hand feeding is greater variation in performance. 8 trials supplemented or summarized over a number of years produced the same average performance, but the self-fed cattle had about twice the variation in response as the hand-fed cattle did. Self-fed diets, self-fed products are advertised as promoting consumption and performance that's identical to hand-fed. Okay? I believe that that's true. I believe that the averages are identical. It's the variation that we probably have trouble with. Okay, and most of the time when people decide to self-feed as opposed to hand-feed, it's because of the labor issue. I don't have time to be out there with the cows 7 days a week. The happy message is that you can feed on an alternate day basis in slightly greater amounts and get the same performance response as if you feed every single day. You can take a week's worth of feed and you can prorate it Monday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and get the same response as if you hand feed 7 days a week. And a little data to back that up. This was a study done at the University of Idaho where they fed the same amount of supplemental crude protein twice a day, once every other day. Okay, they all in 48 hours got the same amount of supplemental protein, but you look at any one of these performance categories here, there are no differences at any of the 3 supplemental levels. The only differences are relative to the control. Okay, this works. This kind of research literally has been replicated at every land-grant school in this country. Alternate day supplementation is a real avenue to cost savings when you're putting together a supplementation program for a client. And that's where I'll stop.
Questions? You want to go to once a week?
Unknown. I'm aware of one little study. It's pretty old. It was conducted in the 1960s that directly compared once a week supplementation with 7 days a week supplementation. There was only 1 year of data. 2 years of data that were associated with it, and it looked pretty good. For mature beef cows, the ones that got the great big meal once a week performed just about as well at counting and breeding as the cows that got 7 little meals every day of the week. I don't know if that's enough data for me to put my trust in, but you can bank on the fact that 3 days a week are going to be just as good as 7 days a week. That's big. Well, when you're hand feeding with this kind of a system, with an alternate day system, you still control as the manager how much physical space you spread that feed out on. It's kind of like eating at a bunk. If everybody's got room to come up, everybody has an equal chance of getting those supplemental nutrients. If I put my supplemental nutrients out once a month, in a round tub that's about this big, okay, there's going to be reality of limited access there. Boss cow is going to occupy half of that feeding space for a great deal of the time, and she's probably going to chase some of her sisters away when they come up and eat. She's not going to be able to do that if there's 100 feet of feed access. Yes.
Questions I've seen about
Mm-hmm.
as a supplementation strategy, evaluation of baling
Bale injection has got a little kernel of research behind it that shows that if you inject a bale with some forms of liquid feed, that you'll make the quality of that bale greater. I would remind those considering that sort of an avenue that you've still got to get that bale that's now probably 30 pounds or 30% heavier than when you started. You've still got to get it out into a feeder, and you've got to convince those cows not to pull hunks of that bale out, drop it outside of the feeder, and step on it and crap on it. Okay, there's still a huge amount of potential waste in a round bale feeding situation. And if you're investing all of your supplement dollars in a treatment for the forage, and not in a treatment for the cow, you risk losing that investment.
You have a chart here about nutrient toxins, supplementation frequencies. And I potentially 3 times a week on the real time, but
okay. Now that was a Matheson Sawyer study. There was no equipment depreciation in it per se. That involved pickup mileage and operator labor. That's basically how they calculated it. The mileage charge that they used was a 10-mile round trip to and from the feeding site, and about 50 cents a mile. That study's got a little age on it, but it's still good for relative comparison purposes.
And on the self-fed,
Yeah, anything that you can physically lift onto a pickup bed and take out there once a week, they consider it as a potential self-fed supplement. Could be hay, could be a concentrate, could be a lick tub or something similar. But just the labor cost. They assume that even if you're self-feeding, you're at least going to want to go out there and look at it once a week.
was a matter of I go out and roll a barrel, I just be afraid to go down the barrel and go is it really that much different?
Yeah. I mean, that's a question that's beyond my ability to answer. How much does it cost to turn a key on a tractor versus a key on a pickup? How much labor does it take me as the operator to get out of the pickup, climb in the tractor, fuss with it when it won't start, take it out, take the bale out there, shut the tractor off, put it away. You know, there's all kinds of things that go into that consideration. But tractors are more valuable than pickups, and depreciation on tractors is less rapid than it is on pickups. So that's something for Kevin to do better. I can't
No,
answer.
and I understand that. We're looking at so dumping a bale feeder once a day with price spread. They were doing that what all constitutes self-fed, and that study was it's self-fed, but from the fact that not really self-fed.
Yeah, I don't know.
Tracy, we really appreciate his comments this morning, and I hope we have this recorded so we can review certain messages that we need to hear again. And I think at this point in time, maybe Shelley, rather having you say something now when I'm just quickly down front, we're going to do that after we eat. That seems like a better plan. So we've got lunch set out here. There's varieties on each platter should be slightly different. I'm not sure exactly what's on them, but there's more additives over here. We have water, iced tea, and Diet Coke.